Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro, where we're still at the New Zealand Stormwater Conference. I'm here with Francis Charters, and I'll give you a second in a moment to introduce yourself, but we were talking a couple of hours ago, just before we went out on the field trip, about Christchurch, post-earthquake, rebuilds, and a couple of things, or a couple of philosophies that are being applied in the civil infrastructure space that have got us thinking about how might that apply to green infrastructure. So, do you want to give a couple of sentences, I suppose, who you are, and then kick into what you were telling me about Christchurch and rebuild?
Okay, so I'm Francis Charters, so I'm based at the University of Canterbury down in Christchurch. So I work in civil and natural resources engineering. My background happens to be in pollution characterisation and treatment in stormwater, but working broadly in the stormwater space.
Okay.
So I guess one of the things that triggered this conversation is I saw in your presentation looking at a variety of green infrastructure bioretention basins and trying to identify which one was the odd one out. And the key idea was there was one site where they hadn't received much maintenance, but had still naturally developed a bit more of a complex vegetation ecosystem.
Yep.
And it's this idea of self-repair or facilitating that. So then I started talking with Jack about the lessons that we learnt from earthquake damage to our stormwater pipe and built civil infrastructure in Christchurch. And a key concept that our recovery design team were using is this idea of incorporating a known and intentional failure point within a system, so that you know when you have maybe a future damage event such as an earthquake, you actually know where the energy is directed, or you know where it is going to fail. You've accounted for that, you've got access to this particular location, you've got spare parts available, you get in there, you fix it up, and the system as a whole is functional again. So that can be easily seen with pipe infrastructure, where maybe you have the sacrificial joint, but also maybe with stop banks or bunds and earthwork-based systems, where maybe you have a vulnerable location that's intentional, so all the energy sort of gets channeled towards that failing. That helps with the resilience of the rest of the infrastructure, and then you've also got something you can focus and on a quick time frame get in and fix up. So take it from there.
Yeah, so this got me thinking, because it ties in sort of to something I've been thinking about really recently, but not entirely. So I feel that there's some sort of new info here, and I don't that will stretch and how it relates to green infrastructure will become apparent at some point in the future. I haven't quite got there, but where it does tie into something I'm thinking of, so to date, is I've always thought about, okay, we're building a rain garden or something like that. How do we make it resilient so if we don't maintain it, that, well, it's going to be as close to that state when we do come back to it. But I've recently slightly changed that thinking, not to say that's wrong thinking, but added to it another direction to it, which is, how do we design systems such that their failure mode, if we do nothing to them, is relatively minor and easy to recover from. So the best example I can give is this. If you think of a standard, say, a rain garden in the street, the way we typically end up building them, regardless of the street, regardless of whether there was a garden bed there before, we end up planting them with emergent plants and tufted species, and those can be, if we're, at least in a Queensland context, if we're not maintaining regularly, then some creepers might get over the top, other weeds will get up amongst them, outcompete them, eventually the desirable plants will die, and then we have to come back on and replant.
The whole lot.
The whole lot, pretty costly. On the other side of that, if you had a residential street where it was appropriate, you might build a streetscape rain garden with simply grass turf and a tree in it. Because the failure mode for that, if you don't maintain it, is, well, even if you did get a creeping species in there, you still just come back and mow it at some point and knock it off, and the turf is going to then be in the best position. So it's thinking about, well, what's the failure mode that's going to happen? It's not exactly the same as building in a deliberate failure point, and I don't quite know what that's going to look like yet in green infrastructure, but it's along a similar lines.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we were also talking about is recognising that these natural systems, we create the starting circumstances from which they develop, whether it's, self-repair or just successional development, and we're not quite sure where it's going to end up.
Yep.
And it's about designing our system where the different options that we think it could end up in all achieve the function that we want it to achieve. So how we think about that in our design as well.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is almost like the failure modes are still, the failure modes if we do nothing could still be acceptable, but equally the what it emerges to, even if we are doing good stuff, is acceptable.
Yeah, and also maybe being open to maybe assessing or reanalyzing the function and performance of a system as it's changed over time, and maybe we completely rejig or retweak our maintenance.
Yeah, and
we don't try and get it back to what it was.
Yeah, and this is something
that
I think that maintenance people in Queensland are getting better at, particularly in the space of assets that, because we've been through this phase of building assets for really quite a few, 10 plus years for some councils now, having maintenance budgets for less of that, there's a backlog of assets that need some rectification to fix them up. I've certainly seen councils in this space thinking along those lines with the fixing up assets, going, look, I know it was meant to be a wetland, but it would make more sense now with our limited resources to do this.
Yeah.
But thinking about that in advance as the systems, actually it's a buyer retention system right now, and it's like this, and it is actually still quite functional, but if we choose these decisions now, it'll evolve in that direction. So
it'll be also interesting to see what feedback we get from changing climate to how the functions of systems change. And different opportunities change of what you actually make of that system.
Cool. I like it.
Find out.
Is there anything else that you want to add to that?
I think that was key thoughts for now.
Yep, I'm keen to dwell on this I suppose the story or the example from Christchurch that you've given, and see what at some point I'm sure that's going to manifest itself in my head as a tangible example for green infrastructure. So thank you for sharing that. Yep.
No, you're welcome.
Exactly. That's cool. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.